In this video, we are breaking down the 5 running backs that you should be targeting and drafting in your fantasy leagues right now. We have all the information from preseason and training camps that we need. These are the dudes that you should be targeting. And we'll start with the Giants' #1 running back, Devin Singletary. They signed him this offseason. They actually ended up giving him a pretty nice deal, as you can see right here. Adam Schefter's tweet when the original deal happened, it was for 3 years, $16.5 million. But more importantly, this was about $10 million guaranteed. $10 million guaranteed is a large sum of money that's probably going to give him the starting job, especially when we look at his competition in a minute. There's not much of it. So Singletary's the newest member of the Giants, and he's actually reunited with his head coach Brian Daboll during their time together with the Buffalo Bills. That's where Devin Singletary started his career, as you can see down here, in 2019, and he played all the way through 2021. And if you look at his rushing yards in each of those years, he had 775 as a rookie, 687, and 870. You factor in the receiving yards that he had during those seasons of 194, 269, and 228, and basically all of this production, he was averaging over 1,000 yards per season while splitting a backfield during that time and being in a rookie season for part of that. Long story short, Brian Daboll clearly trusts him, and multiple times this offseason, he's basically referred to him as the guy, like the guy who's going to be out there in all key situations. And that's what he was last year for the Houston Texans, when he actually was able to pick up 216 carries. When you factor in his 38 targets, he saw one of the top 15 opportunity shares in the NFL. And keep in mind, he signed to the Texans last year on a 1-year deal. He was supposed to be the backup to Dameon Pierce, and he stole that job midway through the season and didn't look back. Now, Singletary isn't this exciting, explosive type of back, but he's like a David Montgomery. He's a veteran player that coaches trust and can get you 4 to 5 yards per carry. Singletary averages a solid 4.6 yards per carry over his 5-year career. And now he got paid pretty significant money to be the Giants' lead back entering 2024, and he goes in around 8 of drafts. Pretty good value. On a team that doesn't have all that much competition. The biggest competition right now in camp is Tyron Tracy, who's been battling an ankle injury but recently returned to camp, and he looks like the running back too. But he's also a 5th-round pick. Although an explosive and exciting 5th-round pick, this is still a rookie who the team would have to trust in key situations, like pass protection on 3rd downs and just an ability to be out there and know your assignment. They're probably going to trust a veteran more. That's what I expect. In the small glimpse and samples that we've got in the preseason, this is from the 2nd preseason game here. This is via PFF. You can see Devin Singletary played 29 of the 33 starter snaps. I mean, that's an elite workload. Eric Gray got the other 4 snaps as Tyron Tracy did not play in this game. And this is kind of in line with all the reports that we're getting out of camp right now, that Singletary is the clear running back 1, and the only job they're trying to decide is who will his backup be. Now, here's an example of one of those reports right here. You can see this coming from Dan Duggan, which is from the New York Times or a New York beat reporter. The running back competition is wide open behind Devin Singletary. The key word there is obviously right here in terms of being behind Devin Singletary, meaning that the obvious RB1 is Singletary. He's going to be the guy out there to start the season for the Giants. And it's interesting to me that you can get him right now in drafts as the running back 29, the 85th overall player. Now, if you're seeing the guys that go around him, I much prefer Jay Lamore, and even with the hamstring injury, he should be back by week 1 or week 2. But when guys like Zach Moss are going ahead of Devin Singletary, a guy who doesn't have the RB1 job locked up, a guy who doesn't have past experience with his current coach, he's on a brand new team as well, but Zach Moss is kind of like a Singletary. I think Singletary is a little bit better as a pass catcher and pass protection, and just has nowhere near as much competition when Moss is going to be dealing with Chase Brown. Now, the one concern I will point out is the Giants' offensive line, according to PFF right now, on paper entering the year, is the 29th ranked offensive line in the league. They did make some moves this past offseason to try and enhance this offensive line. We can pull up the team changes page here in the draft guide, my blueprint, fantasy blueprint. They ended up adding John Runyon from the Green Bay Packers, Jermaine Illuminor, a tackle from the Las Vegas Raiders. And here's the deal with these guys. They're kind of like depth pieces. They're not really going to be starter caliber players. They've started in the past, of course, but they're not going to come in and make your offensive line a top 15 to top 10 unit. They're just going to maybe, hopefully, get it closer to average. Right now, though, a bottom 5 line on paper. But assuming that line isn't just catastrophic, well, then Devin Singletary should still be a nice value in round 8 of your drafts. And right now, he's not being drafted enough. Now, the next man I want to talk about takes us to Minnesota. It's going to be Tai Chandler as he enters his 3rd season, and he's in a great spot to succeed. Now, this is a guy who started his rookie year, and there's a lot of hype around him in training camp, and unfortunately, he only played 3 games as he had a season-ending injury. But then he came back in 2023. He played in all 17 games, and to start the season, he was getting ramped up. Alexander Mattison was there. Even Cam Akers was on this team during that time. But once those guys kind of went down with injury or weren't effective, that's when Chandler took over. Because here's what he did over his final 8 games. Chandler finished as a top 30 running back 50% of the time, ranking top 10 in yards per touch. And we really got to see this upside shine in week 15 last year against the Cincinnati Bengals, where Chandler got to actually start a game, and you could see he had 23 touches, 30 receptions, so a massive 26 opportunities, over 150 total yards if you factor in his on the ground yards, and then his 25 receiving yards and a touchdown. This was his won't start last year, and he paid off in a big way. Now, if you're not familiar with Chandler, according to Player Profiler, he ran a 4.39 at the NFL Combine a few years back. He is a very fast back. He's a productive back. He's dynamic and explosive with the ball in his hands. And if we pull up the team changes page here, you can see that the team cut Alexander Mattison, so he was no longer on the team. So back in March, it was looking like, okay, Tai Chandler's going to have this backfield to himself until the Green Bay Packers cut their veteran running back for a long time in Aaron Jones, and the next morning, the Vikings picked him up. And the Vikings were pretty quick with this one. They signed him to a one-year deal worth $7 million. The big part here was that it was fully guaranteed, and Aaron Jones is now on the division rival, the Minnesota Vikings, the next day, taking the RB1 job at least during that time, right away from Tai Chandler. So some of that steam or some of the hype on Chandler started to die, but I do believe it's still there. Now, we do have to respect what Aaron Jones has done in the NFL. Last year alone, even while playing injured, he still averaged 5.2 yards per touch. In his career, he's always been this guy who can go out there and get you 5 yards every time he touches the ball, but now he's getting older. And as you can see right here, he only ranked 30th in broken tackle rate, a metric where he's usually around the top 10 in. You can see right here, explosive run rate of 10 plus yards. He only ranked 38th. And this was while playing on a good Packers offense that didn't have loaded boxes and had a quality offensive line. So some of his efficiency was starting to wear off last season. And like I said, he's getting older. He's approaching 30 years old, and he has dealt with injuries. Last year, he battled 2 separate injuries that kept him out for 6 weeks. And those injuries weren't great. You have a soft tissue injury in the hamstring right here that he suffered in week 1 towards the end of the game, and he ended up missing some time. Comes back, he has a knee strain. He was on the injury report for about half of the season. And here's the deal. Even when he was out there, he didn't have a ton of competition. A.J. Dillon had arguably his worst season of his career, and then the only other guy out there was Emmanuel Wilson, who was an undrafted free agent. So it wasn't like anybody was actually pushing one Aaron Jones for touches. A quality player, but he wasn't as effective last year. Now he actually has competition, because Tai Chandler, in my opinion, right now at this stage in their careers, is a better player than one Emmanuel Wilson was last year, the undrafted free agent, and also A.J. Dillon. He's a more dynamic player. He's a guy who can be very explosive, hit a home run 20 to 30 plus yard play for you, when A.J. Dillon's probably not going to do that. This is a guy that coaches want to get on the field. And I do believe that Tai Chandler right away can push for a 50% snap share with Aaron Jones. Maybe it's 35, 45% to start the season, but as it goes on, the younger back who has been recently more efficient in Chandler, I think has an opportunity to break out. But despite all this information, Chandler still goes in round 13 as one of the better backup running backs that you can find. And this is the exact type of player you want to be targeting in those later rounds of your draft. A young player, he's entering year 3, he's still just 26 years old, who is very fast. We showed you the 4.39 speed, explosive, and coaches are going to want to get him on the field, and he has experience in this system as well. Now, this next running back I'm going to talk about goes in round 15, meaning a lot of you can take him in like the last round of your drafts, and he does have a good amount of upside. But before we get there, do you want to win your fantasy league is the question that I will ask you. And if this sounds like you, well, then there's a link in the description below, and you just click this simple button right here, get access, and you can get access to the risk-free fantasy blueprint. It's risk-free this year if you sign up through one of our 2 partners below. You can see that right here. Now, what does this mean? Well, the fantasy blueprint is a tool that will help you not only with your draft, every single thing you'll need for that, but also every week of the season to win your weekly matchups and get to the playoffs. And if you don't get to your fantasy playoffs, well, I'll refund your one-time payment of $10. That's it. $10 for the entire year. You don't make your fantasy playoffs, you get it right back, no questions asked. About 15,000 people are currently using the fantasy blueprint to win their leagues, and honestly, people in your league might have it, so you just needed to keep up with them. So if you want to get access to your fantasy blueprint with all those people today, the tools that I use in all my drafts, click the link in the description below or scan this QR code right here on the screen. All right, now that 15th round pick I was talking about takes us to a Chargers rookie in Kamani Vidal, who he is out of a small school in Troy. And here's the deal. This is a guy who there was some rumors that he might get cut. You can see here a beat reporter, Daniel Popper, a very good beat reporter for the Chargers. He basically was saying in this article here, if we were to kind of click through it, it's linked on Twitter. You can check it out, and we'll pull it up right now on The Athletic. You can see this highlighted part right here. It says Vidal had a strong week of practice last week. He followed that up with a solid performance in his first game of action in the preseason. I have moved him ahead of Isaiah Spiller and onto the 53-man depth chart. So this is important because before week 2 of the preseason, there was rumors that the late round pick, Kamani Vidal, could be cut, but he was just dealing with injury. Now that he was actually out there on the field, he looked good. Now, a lot of you who are just getting back into football don't know who this guy is, and it makes sense. He was a 6th round pick. He's out of a small school in Troy, but he kind of has everything that you want in a running back. He has nice size, close to 220 pounds, runs a 4.46 for that size, which is very good. And then you pull up all the production he was able to have at Troy. I mean, last year alone, as a rusher on the ground, he had 1,600 rushing yards, led all of college football last year. Then you factor in his receiving yards, he had 1,800 total yards. He's also able to catch passes. And the big one here, the fact that he's a late round pick, usually these guys don't get on the field, but the big one, he can pass protect. Coaches need to see that, especially when you have a potential franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert you're trying to protect. And Kamani Vidal is a playmaker, which is something that this team needs, because look at all the subtractions according to the team tracker in the fantasy blueprint right here. They lost Austin Eckler, they lost Mike Williams, they lost Keenan Allen, they lost Gerald Everett, they lost Jalen Guyton. They literally lost 3 of their 4 starting receivers. They lost their starting running back and their starting starting tight end. And they also now have to replace these guys. And this is who they replaced them with. You can see right here, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. And this is interesting because that's the biggest competition right now, most likely for Kamani Vidal, assuming he makes the team, which he should, is going to be an aging veteran in Gus Edwards coming off of one of his worst efficiency seasons last year. And then there's J.K. Dobbins, who is coming off of an Achilles tear after a couple of years ago having a multi-ligament knee injury, and we'll see how ready he is. But now he's going to be still just 25 years old, but all these injuries are adding up for him. And this is a guy that we haven't seen play in football. We don't know if he's going to be 100% week one. And also he signed a contract for just $50,000, which is great money, but compared to most NFL backups that get $3.5 million, $3 million or so, $50,000 doesn't really incentivize the team to give him a lot of touches. So when I'm looking at Kamani Vidal in like round 15, 16, even 17 for some of you of your drafts right now, why not just add him? See what happens the first couple of weeks of the season with the Chargers, the team that wants to run the ball with new coach Jim Harbaugh behind an offensive line that they drafted a top 5 overall pick, Joe Alt, in the NFL draft. See what happens on this run first team with aging veterans. Maybe Vidal earns a role right away, or it takes a couple of weeks. And if he doesn't, well, then you could just drop him. If he does, you might have a league winner on your hands. Now, the next running back you should be drafting in fantasy is Tyler Algier, the Atlanta Falcons, who I would argue is the best backup running back. You want to call it a handcuff, sure, but I'll just say backup running back in fantasy right now. Algier currently goes in round 14 of fantasy drafts. You see him right here, the 159th overall player, the RB50, and he's going after guys like Marshawn Lloyd, who is dealing with multiple injuries in Packers camp. I believe he's firmly behind not only Josh Jacobs, but A.J. Dillon on that depth chart. So look, he's the RB3 on his team. Tyler Algier is the clear running back 2 on his team behind Bijan, but it's going to see probably 8 to 10 touches per game, and then has a ton of upside if Bijan was to miss time. And look, all the talk right now this offseason is that Bijan Robinson is going to see a massive workload this year. It makes sense. He was a first-round pick, a top 10 overall pick just a couple of seasons ago, last season in the 2023 draft, you can see right here, by the Falcons, and now they have a new coach that might actually properly use him like Arthur Smith didn't last year. And the hype truly is growing on him, because we had this quote earlier this offseason from new offensive coordinator Zach Robinson, comes over from the Rams, and he basically said, like, yeah, we want to do what Christian McCaffrey is doing right now with the 49ers. That's exactly how we want to start to use Bijan Robinson. And people started getting crazy about this, but this was already expected. Like, yeah, they want to use Bijan Robinson on 3 downs in ability to catch the ball as well out of the backfield, which is just basically what the CMC role is nowadays. It's been like the trendy thing this offseason. You can see right here, Wolf of Roto Street on Twitter pulls a quote from Winfield NFL saying that Devon Achane of the Dolphins, they also said that he's going to be the next Christian McCaffrey in terms of his overall versatility and usage. It's just the trendy thing to say, yeah, the guy who is on the 49ers catching a lot of passes and playing all 3 downs, Christian McCaffrey, we want to use our running back like that, but in reality, it's probably just not going to happen. Because for Devon Achane himself, he has some competition, and he's not the same type of player or pass catcher as McCaffrey, and Bijan Robinson is closer, but still not the same overall type of player. I think people forget just how good of an all-purpose player Christian McCaffrey was in college football. Bijan Robinson was a great college player as well, but mostly known as a running back, a 3-down back, not for his pass catching abilities, the same way McCaffrey was coming out as an all-purpose player. But even if he was to see the exact same type of usage as a Christian McCaffrey in terms of all 3 downs and pass protection, I still think that makes Tyler Algier's role as the backup even more valuable, because he would slide into that role if Bijan missed time. And this is a dude who is a good player. He would see that whole workload because he's shown he can do it in the past. As a rookie in 2022, a late round rookie, I believe a 5th round pick, he sets the Falcons rushing record for a rookie with over 1,000. Then last year, he's able to see 186 rushing attempts despite playing next to Bijan Robinson, adds in 18 receptions. The dude was seeing right around 10 to 12 touches per game, and I think even though Bijan might see a larger role this year, we're still going to see around 8 to 10 touches per game for Algier, because there's nobody who's going to threaten Tyler Algier for the backup job. Avery Williams, Jace McClain, if you're sitting here wondering who is Avery Williams and Jace McClain, I'm wondering the same, because as of just a couple of weeks ago when I did another video on the Falcons backfield, I didn't know who those guys were at all. They're not going to factor in, especially if Bijan goes down. They're not going to be taking touches away from Tyler Algier. And you can make of this quote what you want, but his own offensive coordinator did recently say towards the beginning of training camp, certainly Tyler Algier is going to have a big role, and at certain times leaned on this season in this offense. And now I do think this is just coach speak. He's not going to say bad things about Algier, who's been a quality player, but I do think it's important that he did say stuff like a big role and leaned on. I don't know if it's going to be 15 plus touches a game, but at times this year, I do think maybe second halves, they're leading games, you might see an extra couple of carries for Algier to close out the game. So all I'm saying here is don't overlook Algier in the 14th round of the drafts if you're looking for like that RB5 on your team who could have a lot of upside if something was to happen to the start. Now, the next man I want to talk about is a guy who is going to be a starter week 1, and that's Jerome Ford, who enters his 3rd season in the NFL, and he's expected to start week 1 for the Cleveland Browns because of this tweet right here earlier in the offseason. It's looking like Nick Chubb, as of right now, we could pull it up from Underdog here, he is not going to be ready to start the season. And more recently, we're getting some reports out of the Bengals or the Browns beat reporters that they're probably leaning for him to go on the PUP list. That's not official, but that would mean Chubb misses at least 4 weeks this year. And now that is in line with the reports that we're getting out of Cleveland that Chubb, they're just hopeful, which is not a great word, that he could play at some point this year. That's not encouraging. So there's a good chance that Jerome Ford is the starter to begin this year. That's kind of what they're saying he's ramping up to be. And then his other competition in the backfield was a veteran that they signed this offseason, and Deontay Foreman. And D'Onta Foreman is also somebody who suffered an injury early on in camp, and it was a scary injury. He had to get carted off. This is a guy who ended up getting carted off with a neck injury. He did return to practice, you could see here at the beginning of August, but he has not really gone into team drills just yet as of this recording. It's uncertain his status for week 1. They're thinking that he's going to play, but again, this is a guy who didn't get a lot of reps on his new team. Now Jerome Ford has been on this team entering year 3, prepping to be the RB1. Now Ford did get to fill in for Chubb last year, who went down early in the season with that gruesome knee injury, and here's what he did. He finished as a top 25 fantasy option on the year, producing over 1,100 total yards in 17 games. And now he has a full offseason to prepare to be the RB1, and it helps that he's going to have a top 5 offensive line this year. On paper last year, the Browns entering the year had a good offensive line, but they dealt with a lot of injuries, and a lot of those injuries will no longer be an issue because they're getting back Wyatt Teller, Jedrick Willis, some of these big pieces on their offensive line that are going to propel them forward to be a top 5 unit once again. That only helps Ford. Now, Jerome Ford is not your elite athlete, anything like that. He has nice size at 210 pounds. He does run a 4.46, so in terms of speed, he has that, but he's not going to be this guy who has elite burst. He's not a Jahmyr Gibbs type player, right? He's not an Alvin Kamara in his prime, but he's a guy, like we mentioned earlier, a David Montgomery type player, a Devin Singletary type player, maybe even a little bit better there, who can go out there and get you 16 plus touches and also factor in as a receiver. So in round 10 of drafts, you have a lot of nice options here. You have a guy like Chase Brown, but he's starting to go in round 9 more often. I would prefer Chase Brown, but if he's not available or even Jerome Ford falls later into drafts, I think Jerome Ford, who's going to start the season on a good offense, behind a good offensive line with a good coach as the RB1, I think he's a nice option in round 10. Now, before we get to the final running back that you should be taking in your fantasy drafts and drafting more often, I want to let you know that 65% of people who watch these videos are not subscribed. And I get it. People just don't remember. You're watching on your TV, your tablet. I barely remember when I'm watching people that I like. But if you just take 2 seconds, hit the subscribe button. My goal is to get that closer to 50% by week 1, and it helps the channel out a ton. So hit that subscribe button. And that final running back you should be drafting takes us to Tennessee, where we're talking about Taj Spears, a second-year player who is rising up the rankings quickly right now. And it all started this offseason, where you can see right here on the team tracker page, Derrick Henry was released by the team. A longtime Tennessee Titan with them his whole career. He's gone. He's now a Baltimore Raven. And instead, the team went out and signed, as you can see over here, Tony Pollard from the Cowboys to a 3-year deal. But all offseason, we've heard reports from their new head coach, Brian Callahan, and a couple of other coaches, the offensive coordinator, even the quarterback there, and Will Levis, that this is going to be a split backfield. And here is some more proof on that. You can see right here, he talks about both Taj Spears and Tony Pollard. He's referring to them as interchangeable. The head coach from the Titans right here. There's another piece when they released their first unofficial depth chart, which these things aren't really all that important. The unofficial depth chart, not a lot of thought goes into this to begin the offseason, but it is pretty interesting. I've never seen a team list both running backs as co-RB1s, which is just in line, and the drumbeat kind of continues there with what you're seeing all offseason from what the coaches are saying. Now, if you're not familiar with Spears, he is a second-year player. He's just 23 years old, a former third-round pick, and he is athletic. For a guy who's about 200 pounds, the speed isn't going to be there as much, but this is a guy who, kind of like a Kyron Williams, maybe even a little bit better, has a great burst score, and during his time in college, he was highly productive. His final year in 2022, he puts up nearly 1,600 rushing yards. He ended his college career with either 7 or 8 straight games of 125 total yards, and he knows how to catch passes. And all this success continued into his first year, his rookie year, last year in the NFL, because he was able to see 53% of the snaps, which might not be impressive to many of you, but that means as a rookie, he split and saw more than 50% of the snaps in a backfield with Derrick Henry. He was able to do something that basically no other running back was really ever able to do these last 5 or 6 years, no matter who the Titans drafted, and earn a half of the backfield and touches away from Henry. And in his rookie season, he was good. Here's what he did. Spears ranked top 10 in broken tackle rate, explosive run rate, and yards per touch. Now, obviously, Tony Pollard will be involved, and I actually think he's a solid pick right here. Usually goes in like round 7 or 8 of drafts, you can see, but the big thing is if this is going to be a split backfield, a co-backfield, Pollard's going as a 79th overall player, you have to scroll 20 plus picks, almost 30 picks down to Spears, who goes outside the top 100 players. He's going about 20 to 25 picks after Tony Pollard in drafts, which in my opinion, in round 9, sometimes round 10, it's pretty good value. There's a world where Spears is actually the running back 1 on this team by the end of the year, meaning you get a great value on him in a brand new offense with a new offensive line, a new coach in Brian Callahan, and the quarterback entering year 2, Will Levis. Now that offensive line is a little bit sketchy. You can see PFF has them on paper as the 30th ranked offensive line. I do think it's a little bit better than this if we looked at some of their personnel pieces. They do have Lloyd Cushenberry, a center that they ended up signing in free agency. I think he's a quality veteran center. Peter Skoronski comes back in year 2, hopefully can be a little bit healthier this year, a nice young tackle for them. But then the big piece here was J.C. Latham, who was a tackle taken with a top 10 pick in this year's NFL draft. If Latham can be good as a rookie, and if we can get Peter Skoronski coming back in his second year in the league, this could be a line that's closer to average, which is all you need for your fantasy running back to be valuable. So these are the running backs that you should be drafting in your fantasy league. But if you want to see every single round, the best pick in those rounds, kind of your guide to drafts this year, well, check out this video that we released earlier in the week right here. It'll help you do just that, not only preparing, but while you're doing your draft, help you out a ton. Check it out.